There is a small moated castle in the high Weald of Kent, where two of the 6 wives of Henry VIII lived. One was beheaded on Tower Green at the age of 35. One was paid off after a marriage of 6 months, and given the castle of the executed wife's family as the price of her divorce. Both, in their different ways, ended badly inside the same Kent walls. The first was Anne Boleyn. She was 20 when she returned to her father's house at Hever in 1521 after 12 years at the French court. She was 25 when the king first sent her a love letter from Greenwich. She was 32 when she was crowned Queen of England at Westminster Abbey. She was 35 when she was beheaded on the Green at the Tower of London on the 19th of May 1536 on charges of adultery, incest with her brother, and conspiring the king's death, charges that historical scholarship has spent 400 years finding insufficient to explain her execution. The actual reason was political. By the spring of 1536, her radical Reformation politics had outlived her usefulness to Thomas Cromwell, and she had failed once to deliver a male heir. Cromwell engineered her removal in 14 days from arrest to execution. The second wife, who lived at Hever, was the German Princess Henry, married 4 years after Anne's execution, and divorced 6 months after the wedding. Her name was Anne of Cleves. She had been chosen sight unseen on the strength of a Holbein portrait Henry had commissioned in 1538. When she arrived at Rochester in January 1540, Henry rode out incognito to meet her in advance, took one look at her in person, and was, in his own subsequent letter to Cromwell, profoundly disappointed. The marriage went ahead anyway on the 6th of January 1540 because the political alliance with the German Protestant princes had already been negotiated. Henry refused to consummate it. He sought immediate divorce. The annulment was granted on the 9th of July 1540 on the technical grounds of Anne's prior pre-contract to a Duke of Lorraine and on the king's open admission in front of the Privy Council that the marriage had not been consummated. He paid her off. The settlement was extraordinary. She was made a Princess of England, with precedence after the king's daughters. She was granted an income of £4,000 a year for life. She was given 2 royal residences as her private property, Richmond Palace, on the Thames upstream of London, and Hever Castle in Kent. She was given the title of the King's beloved sister. But the settlement of Hever Castle was the strangest decision Henry VIII ever made about a discarded wife. He gave Anne of Cleves the family seat of Anne Boleyn. Hever Castle covers half an acre of building. Its moat runs to 1/3 of an acre. Its surviving medieval and Tudor structure is small by the standards of any other castle still open to visitors, by the standards of the families that owned it, the de Hevers, the Cobhams, the Bullens, the Waldegraves, the Astors. It is something quite different from a defensive castle. It is the small, intensely lived-in private dwelling of a series of upwardly mobile English gentry families. The place where one family's daughter caught a king's eye in 1521, and the place where, 4 years after she was beheaded, another rejected wife was sent in 1540 to live out the rest of her life in compensation for a marriage that had lasted 6 months. They photograph the moat from the wooden bridge. They walk the Tudor gardens. They pause in the small bedroom on the second floor of the gatehouse where the official guide says Anne Boleyn slept. They buy honey and Tudor-themed shortbread in the gift shop. But almost none of them ask the question the small castle and its 125 acres of grounds and its row of Astor monuments seem to insist upon. How did this small Kent castle become the single most visited Tudor pilgrimage site in England? The answer is one of the most peculiar coincidences of architectural history. Hever was the family seat of one beheaded queen. Therefore it was, by 1540, in the hands of the crown after Anne Boleyn's father, Sir Thomas Boleyn, died of grief in March 1539. Therefore, Henry had it to give. Therefore, he gave it to the wife he had just discarded, in what was almost certainly a deliberate act of layered humiliation. The German princess he did not want would live, for the rest of her life, in the rooms where the executed queen he had once wanted had grown up. On this channel, we tell the story of every great English house through the names the official guidebook forgot. Hever is the most beheaded castle in England. 2 of the 6 wives of one king lived in its walls. It is also the story of the Boleyn household chamberlain who died of plague the same week as Sir Thomas Boleyn died of grief, the village kitchen maid who married Anne's father Smith, the year Anne was first courted by the king, and the German lady-in-waiting from Cleves who travelled with Anne in 1539 and stayed at Hever with her until Anne's death in 1557. If you find these deep investigations into Britain's great castles and the hidden lives within them worth your time, please subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me which estate or castle we should explore next and help these stories reach the audience they deserve. It begins with a small fortified manor, but it ends with a German princess living in a beheaded queen's bedroom. In the year 1270, Walter de Hever, a Kent gentleman of moderate means, was granted license by Edward I to fortify his manor at Hever in the Weald. The original castle was a small square enclosure of stone walls with a wooden bridge over the moat, a single gatehouse, and a hall house at the centre of the courtyard. It was, by the standards of late 13th century English castle building, unambitious. The de Hever line died out in 1462. The castle and manor passed by purchase in or around 1462 to Sir Geoffrey Boleyn. Sir Geoffrey was the son of a Norfolk-yeoman who had become a London mercer, served as Lord Mayor of London in 1457, and had used his fortune to buy minor manorial estates in 3 counties. His grandson, Sir Thomas Boleyn, the spelling Boleyn was a later French affectation of the family name Boleyn, succeeded to Hever in 1505. Sir Thomas was 28 in 1505. He had married Elizabeth Howard, daughter of the Earl of Surrey, in 1499. They had 3 surviving children: Mary, born 1499 or 1500, George, born 1503 or 1504, Anne, born sometime between 1501 and 1507, with the surviving evidence pointing most strongly toward 1501. Sir Thomas raised his children at Hever Castle. Anne Boleyn was sent to the court of Margaret of Austria in the Habsburg Netherlands in 1513 at the age of approximately 12 as a maid of honour. She was transferred to the French court in 1514 in the train of Henry VIII's sister Mary on her marriage to King Louis XII. She remained at the French court until 1521, when her father recalled her to England. She was, by the time she returned to Hever in late 1521, at the age of 20, fluent in French, accomplished in the most sophisticated court manners of Renaissance Europe, an excellent dancer and singer, and significantly more cultivated than the average English aristocratic woman of her age. By the time Anne returned to Hever in 1521, her elder sister Mary was already at court and was already, by the consensus of contemporary accounts, the mistress of King Henry VIII. But by the late summer of 1525, the king's attention had transferred from the elder Boleyn's sister to the younger. The first surviving love letter from Henry to Anne is dated approximately late 1526. Hever Castle, small, private, easily accessible by a day's ride from Greenwich, became the principal location of Henry's courtship for the next 6 years. Sir Thomas Boleyn, who had been raised to the peerage as Viscount Rochford in 1525 and who would be created Earl of Wiltshire in 1529, encouraged the courtship. Anne, by every contemporary measurement, encouraged it more. She refused to be the king's mistress. She held out for a different position. The position was the Queen's. The 7-year crisis of the king's great matter, Henry's attempt to obtain a papal annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, lasted from 1527 to 1533. It broke the English Church from Rome. It remade the entire constitutional shape of the English state. Hever Castle was, throughout that crisis, the place Anne Boleyn returned to whenever the politics required her absence from court. She lived there in the spring of 1528 during the sweating sickness epidemic, when she very nearly died. She was at Hever in the autumn of 1528, the spring of 1529, and the late summer of 1530. The room visitors are shown today as her bedroom is, by every reasonable architectural assessment, almost certainly the room she actually slept in during those visits. The wood panelling is original. The window looks east toward the gatehouse. Anne and Henry were secretly married in January 1533. Anne was crowned queen on the 1st of June 1533 at Westminster Abbey. She gave birth to the future Queen Elizabeth I on the 7th of September 1533 at Greenwich. It lasted 3 years. By the spring of 1536, Anne had miscarried at least 2 further pregnancies, including a male child miscarried in late January 1536. The king's affection had transferred, with the exact same arc that had brought Anne herself into his bed 11 years earlier, to a younger woman of Anne's own household. The new woman was Jane Seymour. She would, in 18 months, replace Anne as queen. Anne was arrested at Greenwich on the 2nd of May 1536. The charges were almost certainly fabricated. The historical consensus is that Thomas Cromwell engineered the prosecution to remove Anne for political reasons. Anne was tried before a panel of peers, including her own father, on the 15th of May 1536. She was found guilty. She was beheaded on Tower Green on the 19th of May 1536. She was 35 years old. She had been queen for 2 years and 11 months. Her body was buried in an arrow chest in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula at the Tower. Her father, Sir Thomas Boleyn, died at Hever Castle in March 1539 at the age of 62, of grief, 3 years after his daughter and his son had both been executed. Her brother George had been beheaded the same week as Anne. Her sister Mary lived in obscurity in the Kent village of Rochford and died, almost forgotten, in 1543. Hever was forfeit to the crown, but it did not stay there. In January 1540, Henry VIII married his 4th wife, Anne of Cleves, in a politically motivated alliance with the German Protestant princes brokered by Thomas Cromwell. The marriage failed within 6 months. Henry sought immediate divorce. The annulment was granted on the 9th of July 1540 on the grounds of non-consummation and Anne's prior pre-contract to a Duke of Lorraine. Anne of Cleves was 24 years old. She was a foreign princess in a foreign country whose marriage had lasted 6 months and whose annulment was, in the political circumstances of 1540, a national embarrassment that the king wanted resolved quickly. He gave her a settlement. The settlement was generous. She was made a Princess of England, with precedence after the king's daughters. She was granted an income of £4,000 a year for life. She was given 2 royal residences as her private property: Richmond Palace, on the Thames upstream of London, and Hever Castle in Kent. She accepted. Anne of Cleves moved into Hever Castle in October 1540, 3 months after her divorce and 4 years after Anne Boleyn's execution. She lived there, on and off, for the remainder of her life. She did not marry again. She maintained civil and even friendly relations with Henry until his death in 1547, attending court for state occasions and, on at least one recorded evening in 1542, dining at Hampton Court with Henry and his 5th wife, Catherine Howard, who would herself be beheaded 18 months later. Anne survived all 6 of Henry's wives. She lived through the reign of Edward VI and into the reign of Mary I. She died in July 1557 at Chelsea Manor, aged 41. She was buried at Westminster Abbey. Hever Castle had, by the year of Anne of Cleves' death, housed 2 of Henry VIII's 6 wives. One had been beheaded. One had been paid off. Both had ended badly inside its walls. The 16th and 17th centuries at Hever were quieter. The estate passed through the Waldegrave family, then in the late 18th century to the Meade-Waldo family. The castle declined. By 1900, it was a roof leaking, partially derelict, ivy-covered Tudor relic with a moat full of fallen leaves. It was rented as a farmhouse. Most of the interior had not been occupied for 50 years, but in 1903, it was bought by William Waldorf Astor for £200,000. Astor was an American who had spent his life trying to be English. He was the great-grandson of John Jacob Astor of New York. He had, by 1903, recently moved his entire family permanently to England, become a British subject in 1899, and acquired Cliveden in 1893 as his principal country seat. His purchase of Hever in 1903 was a project of romantic Tudor reconstruction. He spent the next 4 years and approximately £1 million rebuilding the castle, restoring the moat and gatehouse, and constructing the most ambitious 20th century formal gardens of any English country house outside Sissinghurst. The Astor restoration is the Hever that visitors see today. It is, in many ways, a 1903 romantic American reconstruction of a 1530s Tudor private castle, conducted with the resources of an oil and real estate fortune by a man who genuinely believed the historical Anne Boleyn could be partially recovered through architectural sympathy. He sometimes succeeded. The bedroom shown to visitors as Anne's is plausibly hers. The long gallery is partially original Tudor work with Astor additions. The carved room is largely Astor reconstruction. The garden is entirely Astor. The Astors held Hever until 1983. They sold it in 1983 to a private trust which has run the castle as a public visitor attraction ever since. Hever now receives 180,000 to 220,000 paying visitors a year. Most of them come for Anne Boleyn, but the castle that astonishes every visitor who crosses the small wooden bridge over the moat was not built or kept by the Boleyns, whose initials are over the gatehouse arch. Their presence at Hever is documented, recorded in ink on paper in the Boleyn estate accounts at the National Archives, in the parish registers of St. Peter's Hever, and in the Astor Restoration Archive at the castle. But their stories are not. There was a household chamberlain called Ralph Tomley, who managed the Boleyn household accounts at Hever between 1521 and 1539, and who is named 8 times in the surviving Boleyn correspondence. He was a Kent yeoman's son. He had been at Hever since the age of 15. He died of plague in 1539, at the same time as Sir Thomas Boleyn died of grief. He is buried at St. Peter's Hever, in a corner of the churchyard now overgrown with yew. There was a maid called Joan Cooper, who appears in the 1525 Boleyn household register as receiving 4 pence a week, and who is recorded in the parish register of St. Peter's as having married a Hever village smith in 1531. The year Anne began travelling regularly between court and Hever as the king's affianced, Joan was 22 in 1525. She lived to 67. She is buried at St. Peter's. Her grave marker has been illegible since the late 18th century. But the woman whose name should be remembered above every other servant in the Hever records was a German lady-in-waiting called Mother Lowe. Mother Lowe travelled with Anne of Cleves from Dusseldorf in November 1539. She was approximately 40 when she arrived at Hever in October 1540. She remained with Anne of Cleves for the next 17 years, the longest continuous service of any member of Anne's household. She is named in Anne's 1557 will as receiving £100, the largest single bequest to any servant. She returned to Cleves after Anne's death. She died in Dusseldorf in 1568. We do not know her real name. Mother Lowe was the affectionate Tudor English approximation of what may have been a German surname starting with Lowe or Lowe. The Hever household accounts record her wages 44 times under that name. Her German baptismal name was lost in the same crossing of the North Sea that brought Anne of Cleves to England. But what Mother Lowe did between 1540 and 1557 was teach the discarded German Queen of England how to be English. She corrected Anne's pronunciation. She supervised her household. She maintained, after Anne's death, the chest of personal letters Anne had asked to be returned to her German family. The chest survives. It is in the Cleves State Archive at Dusseldorf. It contains 46 letters from Anne of Cleves to her sister Sibylla in Germany, written from Hever Castle between 1541 and 1556. They are some of the most affecting personal letters of any wife of Henry VIII. They appear in the records as footnotes, a name beside a sum, a pence a week wage, a bequest in a queen's will, a chest of personal letters in a German archive. They vanish into the silence that swallows everyone in a great Tudor house who is not a member of the family that owns it. We do not know their faces. We do not know how they viewed the queen they served, or the king who came to court her, or the German princess who arrived in 1540 not speaking English. We know only that they were there, that the castle they served is still standing, that the letters Mother Lowe preserved still survive, and that their names survived, some of them, because the Boleyn account books and the Hever parish registers were kept and nobody threw them away. The Boleyns made queens. Other men and women laid the rushes, washed the linen, and watched the bedroom doors. The castle absorbed both. Stand at the wooden bridge over the Hever moat on a November afternoon. Stand at the moat with the gatehouse rising in golden ragstone above the still water and the rooks circling the tower, and you see what every Tudor history visitor has seen for 120 years, a small medieval and Tudor castle set in 125 acres of Astor-engineered romantic gardens, where two of the wives of Henry VIII lived. But look closer, and the picture complicates. The drawbridge is a 1903 reconstruction. The gardens are entirely 20th century. The Tudor village is 1907. The interior panelling is largely Astor's purchases from English demolitions. The bedroom shown to visitors as Anne Boleyn's is, in its original architectural envelope, plausibly the room she slept in. But the furniture is replica, the decoration is Astor's, and the photograph on the wall is a 19th century engraving. Hever is not one castle. It is the record, in golden Kent ragstone, of two of the most consequential marriages in English constitutional history. Sir Thomas Boleyn wanted his daughters at court. He got them there, and he watched both die or fade out of the official record by 1543. Anne wanted to be queen. She was, for 2 years and 11 months. Anne of Cleves wanted not to be queen. She got Hever as the price of agreeing. Henry wanted divorce after divorce. He got both at the same Kent castle. The Astors wanted to recover the Tudor world by restoring the building Anne had walked. They built the Hever the world now visits. The castle gave them all what they asked of it, in the careful, expensive, neutral manner of a small Kent gentry house that has absorbed two wives of one king and one Edwardian American restoration. The castle always gives. That is its genius, and that is its cost, because what Hever has also always preserved in its parish registers and its Boleyn accounts and its Astor restoration files is the names of the Ralph Tomleys and the Joan Coopers and the Mother Lowes, without whom no queen could have been raised, no German princess settled in retirement, no estate restored. The Boleyns are buried under brass at St. Peter's. Anne Boleyn is in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula at the Tower. Mother Lowe is buried in Dusseldorf, in a grave nobody has visited in 450 years. Hever Castle asks the same question that all great houses ask, but with a particularly Tudor sharpness that no other small castle in England quite matches. Who does a castle belong to? The de Hevers, who built it in 1270, the Boleyns, who held it from 1462 to 1539 and produced two queens, the Anne Boleyn, whose execution at the Tower made the castle famous, the Anne of Cleves, whose retirement made the castle a royal residence for a second time, the Astors, who rebuilt it for romantic Tudor visitors in 1903, the 200,000 paying visitors a year who come for Anne Boleyn, or the moat itself, the small Wealden lake under the gatehouse that was here before any de Hever had a stone wall and will be there long after the last guidebook has been printed. Hever does not answer. The castle never answers. It simply stands, golden ragstone behind a moat, and lets you decide. And on the second floor of the gatehouse, in the small wood-panelled bedroom that the official guide shows as Anne Boleyn's, there is a single pane of original Tudor glass in the upper light of the east window, scratched faintly with the initials A.B. and a date, 1527, that the Astor restorers in 1907 chose to preserve in place rather than to replace. Modern epigraphers have, with very slight reservations, accepted that the inscription is contemporary. The pane is cracked, but intact. The initials are faint, but legible. She was here. She always will be. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you see a building differently, Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me which castle, estate, or hidden history we should investigate next. There are hundreds of these stories waiting to be told, and every one of them is hiding something beneath the surface.